Late afternoon light spilled like liquid gold across the ridges of red willow. The wind carried a thin chill, stirring the dry grasses into restless waves. A lone rider emerged from the distant horizon, her silhouette framed by the dying sun. Hannah Greer pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders and urged the weary mare forward. The town, a scattering of weathered wood and tin roofs, lay ahead, but she didn't plan to linger. She had no business here. No past she wanted remembered, no future she dared imagine. Hannah's hands tightened around the reins. Every mile behind her was an attempt to outrun a life she wished to forget. A failed marriage, whispered rumors in towns she'd never returned to, and a name that carried more shame than pride. Greer, she murmured to herself, tasting it like dirt in her mouth. She hated it. She would bury it as far from this town and its memories as possible. The mare slowed near the edge of the woods. Hannah dismounted, resting her hand against the animal's flank. She could smell the damp underbrush and hear the subtle rustle of leaves. She set her pack down carefully, scanning the tree line with cautious eyes. She preferred solitude. No friendly waves, no curious questions, no one prying into the shadows she carried. She would camp here on the outskirts, hidden but not forgotten by the wind that carried every sound across the valley. Hannah built a small fire, its smoke curling lazily into the sky. She unpacked a modest dinner, dried meat, hard bread, and a tin cup of water. Sitting close to the flames, she thought about the life she had shed like an old coat. Her eyes flicked to the darkness of the woods. That's when she heard it, a soft, almost imperceptible whimper. At first, she froze. The sound could be anything, wind, an animal, or her imagination. But it persisted, soft and fragile, like the faint cry of a bird trapped in a cage. Hannah's instincts, honed by years of surviving in towns that weren't kind to women traveling alone, sharpened. She set down her cup and moved toward the source, every step careful, every shadow examined. There, under a fallen tree, barely covered by a tattered blanket, sat a boy. His eyes were wide, dark, and hollow from hunger or fear, perhaps both. Dirt streaked his cheeks and his ribs showed faintly beneath the thin fabric of his shirt. He didn't speak, only whimpered again, clutching the blanket closer around him. Hannah's heart tightened despite the wall she'd built. She knelt slowly, hands raised in a non-threatening gesture. "Hey there," she said softly. "I won't hurt you." The boy flinched but didn't run. Years of running had made him wary of everyone. She offered him a piece of bread, holding it just within reach. He shook his head, retreating slightly under the tree's shadow. She paused, letting silence hang like a thin veil between them. Then from somewhere deeper in the woods came a low growl. A wolf, perhaps. It padded closer, sniffing the air, eyes glinting in the fading light. The boy froze in terror, trembling against the rough bark. Without thinking, Hannah stepped between him and the animal, her coat flaring like a shield. The wolf sniffed, then, after a tense moment, slinked back into the underbrush. Hannah exhaled, her pulse still hammering. The boy looked at her, wide-eyed, and something unspoken passed between them. She extended her hand again. Slowly, hesitantly, he took it. "Come on," she whispered. "I'll keep you safe." And for the first time in what felt like forever, Hannah allowed herself a small, guarded hope that maybe, just maybe, this child could be a reason to stop running, not a past she needed to bury, but a life she could start to build. As the sun sank behind the hills, she led him toward the small cabin she'd claimed at the edge of the woods. The boy followed quietly, trusting her in a way no one had in years. She didn't tell him her name, not yet. She didn't need to. Out here in this quiet corner of the frontier, names could wait. What mattered was the warmth of the fire, the simple promise of safety, and the fragile, flickering possibility of a new beginning. The cabin smelled of pine, old wood, and a faint trace of smoke that had lingered from Hannah's first nights here. The boy hesitated at the threshold, his small frame trembling, Hannah knelt, lowering herself to his eye level. "It's all right," she said gently. "You can stay. No one will hurt you here." For a long moment he only stared. Hunger tugged at his limbs, but pride, or maybe fear, kept him from speaking. Hannah rummaged through her pack, producing a tin of stew she had prepared earlier. The aroma wafted toward him, filling the tiny cabin with warmth. She set the tin near his feet and stepped back, giving him space. The boy's eyes flickered to the food, then to her. Slowly, cautiously, he sank to the floor, still clutching his blanket. He didn't speak. He didn't ask for anything. He simply ate, one small spoonful at a time, watching her as if trying to measure whether she was a threat or a savior. Hannah resisted the urge to speak too much. Silence could be a bridge, she knew, if spoken with patience. It wasn't long before she noticed the bruises along his arms, faded but unmistakable, and the scars that lined his small shoulders and back. Each one told a story she didn't need words to translate. This boy had endured more than most adults she knew. Her chest tightened. How many nights had he gone hungry? How many hands had struck him? She felt a surge of protective instinct she hadn't known existed anymore. "You're safe now," she whispered almost to herself. The boy paused mid-bite, glancing at her. For the first time, she saw the tiniest flicker of trust in his eyes. But just as quickly, the shadow of caution returned. He pushed the tin away, standing abruptly. I can't stay," he muttered, voice cracking. Hannah rose too, her heart sinking. "You don't have to stay if you don't want to," she said, her voice steady, calm. "But I can't let you go out there alone." She pointed toward the woods, where darkness now pressed against the edges of her cabin. "It's not safe. Wolves, coyotes, worse." The boy looked away, hugging his blanket tightly. "I don't care," he muttered. "I've been alone before. I can do it again." Hannah knelt slowly, maintaining eye contact without being overbearing. "I know you've been alone," she said softly, "but you don't have to be anymore." "Not with me." She paused, letting the words settle. He still didn't respond. Then came a sudden snap of a twig outside. Hannah stiffened, listening. The boy froze completely, eyes wide. A low growl rolled through the underbrush. She knew immediately. A wolf. Her instincts sharpened. She stepped in front of him again, holding her arms wide, making herself appear larger. The wolf emerged from the shadows, eyes glinting with hunger. It hesitated, sniffing the air, sensing her presence. Hannah's heart pounded, but her resolve didn't waver. Slowly, deliberately, she raised a small branch in one hand, keeping her other hand near the boy. The creature lunged once, then stopped, swayed uncertainly, and finally backed away, slipping silently into the darkness. The boy exhaled in a shuddering breath, clutching her sleeve. I thought it was going to get me," he whispered. "You're safe," Hannah said firmly, pressing a hand to his shoulder. "I won't let anything hurt you, ever." For the first time since she had found him, the boy didn't flinch away. He looked up at her with wide, unguarded eyes and hesitantly took her hand. Together they walked back inside the cabin. That night the wind howled outside, rattling the walls and shaking the trees. But inside, warmth lingered. Hannah prepared a simple meal, this time with extra care, and watched as he finally ate without fear. She didn't tell him her name. She didn't have to. Names were for the past, and she intended to leave hers buried. But in the soft glow of the firelight, she began to understand something she hadn't in years. Caring for another could begin to heal her own wounds. And this boy, lost and fragile, had already started to carve a space in her heart she hadn't realized was empty. By the time the fire burned low, he was asleep, curled beneath a rough blanket, small chest rising and falling in rhythm with the wind outside. Hannah sat in the corner, watching him, feeling the weight of her own grief lighten slightly. The past was still there, but for the first time in years, the future felt like something she could face. The days that followed settled into a quiet rhythm, a fragile routine carved from necessity and cautious trust. Hannah rose with the sun, tending to her modest garden and chopping wood for the cabin stove. Sammy, the boy who still refused to say much of anything, followed her every move with wide, watchful eyes, learning through observation more than instruction. She cooked simple meals, offering him portions carefully measured for nourishment. He ate, at first hesitantly, then with a growing sense of comfort. Slowly, she began mending his torn clothes, sewing rips and patching holes with scraps she had saved from her own worn garments. The work was slow, meticulous, but her hands, once accustomed only to handling tools and weapons, learned the gentle precision required for healing both cloth and flesh. One morning, as frost lingered on the cabin roof and the trees glistened with early winter dew, Hannah asked softly, "Where did you come from, Sammy?" The boy flinched at the sound of his name, but it had already slipped past her lips, an instinctive attempt at giving him identity in a world that had stripped it away. He didn't answer immediately, staring into the distance, tracing invisible patterns in the frost with his finger. I ran," he said finally, voice trembling. "From him?" Hannah's heart sank. She knew there was more, but she let him speak on his own time. "My parents, He swallowed hard and tears welled in his eyes. "They died sick. I was all alone. And then his voice broke. He buried his face in his hands, shaking. Hannah moved closer, kneeling beside him, her hand resting on his trembling shoulder. "It's not your fault," she murmured. "Nothing you did caused that. And you don't have to face it alone anymore." The words seemed to anchor him, if only slightly. Over the next days, he began to open, small fragments at a time, revealing pieces of the life he had fled. An abusive guardian, harsh words, empty cupboards, long nights of hunger and fear. With each revelation, Hannah felt her own walls soften. Empathy, long dormant, surged through her. She realized that protecting him was not just an act of kindness. It was an act of reclaiming her own fractured sense of purpose. Still, she refused to offer her name. It was a secret she guarded fiercely, a fragment of the past she wanted buried, and yet she found herself listening to him, laughing softly at his awkward attempts to mimic her cooking, marveling at the way he discovered hidden spots in the woods where berries grew in unexpected abundance. One afternoon, as the sun hung low and golden light filled the cabin, Hannah showed him how to start a fire safely, teaching patience, attention, and care. He tried and failed repeatedly, frustration mounting, but she never scolded. Instead, she encouraged, showing him that mistakes weren't the end. They were lessons. By evening, a small flame danced in the hearth, and for the first time she saw pride in his eyes. It was in moments like these that she understood the depth of her own loneliness. The boy's trust had begun to thaw the frozen layers of her soul. She found herself talking to him quietly about simple things: the weather, the forest, the rhythm of chores, allowing fragments of herself to seep through without exposing the past she hid. And then came the day when Sammy, holding a small wooden carving he had fashioned from a fallen branch, looked up at her with a question that lingered longer than the words themselves. "Will you stay with me?" Hannah froze, her chest tightening. Stay with him. Stay for him. For the first time, she didn't turn away. She nodded gently. "Yes, I'll stay." That single affirmation marked a turning point. No longer merely a woman fleeing her past, she began to see herself as someone capable of building a life rooted not in shame or loss, but in care, trust, and choice. The cabin, the woods, even the harshness of frontier life, all of it became a backdrop to a fragile, growing connection that would come to define both their lives. By nightfall, as frost painted the windows and the fire crackled warmly in the hearth, Hannah realized she was no longer just a wanderer. She was a guardian, a teacher, perhaps someday something closer to a family. And Sammy, with his quiet resilience and tentative trust, had already begun to give her a role she hadn't dared hope to claim. Someone who mattered, someone irreplaceable. Winter settled over Red Willow like a slow, gray tide blanketing the hills and fields in frost and snow. Inside the cabin, the warmth of the fire contrasted sharply with the cold outside. Hannah had grown accustomed to the rhythm of caring for Sammy, and he had begun to trust her completely, even calling her Ma in whispered moments when he felt safe enough to claim her attention. The word had slipped out one night as he drifted off to sleep, murmured like a secret prayer, and it had settled in Hannah's chest like sunlight breaking through clouds. But the fragile peace they had built did not go unnoticed. The townsfolk, wary of strangers and protective of their own, began to murmur. A woman carrying a child living alone in the woods. Questions inevitably arose. Some whispered about kidnapping, others about impropriety, and soon the local marshal, a tall man with wary eyes and a cautious demeanor, came knocking. Hannah met him at the cabin door, her posture steady, her hands empty. "Marshal," she said quietly, "this boy is safe. He is hungry, cold, and alone. I found him in the woods." The marshal studied her, skepticism etched into every line of his face. "And who are you, ma'am?" he asked, eyes scanning the boy for signs of distress. "I'm someone who can help him," she replied, her voice calm but firm. "His name is Sammy. He's been through a lot. He needs care, and that's what I intend to give him." The boy's eyes flicked toward her, wide and anxious. She knelt beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Go on," she encouraged softly. "Tell him if you want." For a long moment, Sammy hesitated, looking at the marshal, then back at her. Then in a voice small but steady, he spoke. She's helping me. She takes care of me." The marshal's expression softened slightly, though doubt still lingered. Hannah carefully lifted his tattered blanket, showing the marks and bruises along his arms and shoulders. "These are not lies," she said quietly. "He ran from someone who should have protected him, but I will. I swear it." The man's eyes lingered on Sammy for a moment longer before he nodded, reluctantly conceding that the boy's care was genuine. Still, warnings were given, whispers in the town square, cautionary advice about keeping a child without family ties. Hannah listened without argument. Outside, the wind rattled the windows, carrying news of a world that remained skeptical and watchful. It was in these moments, facing scrutiny yet standing firm, that something shifted inside Hannah. The boy's trust, unwavering despite fear and doubt, gave her the courage she hadn't known she possessed. She realized that for the first time in years, she mattered to someone, and that responsibility was no longer a burden but a lifeline. Over the next few days, their bond deepened in small, ordinary ways. She taught him to chop wood safely, to gather firewood from fallen branches, to read the subtle signs of the forest. He watched her with awe and diligence, absorbing her instructions, and occasionally surprising her with insight beyond his years. One evening, as the first snowflakes began to fall outside, Sammy tugged her hand. Can I help?" Her heart lifted at the sound of the word, the first she had ever heard him use for her. She handed him a small brush for cleaning the hearth. "Of course," she said softly. "You already help more than you know." The fire flickered, casting warm light across their faces, and Hannah felt a sense of purpose blooming that was entirely new. She had chosen to bury her name, to hide from a past full of mistakes and regrets, but here, with Sammy, she was beginning to reclaim an identity not defined by shame or fear, but by love and protection. Outside, the town whispered, the snow continued to fall, and the world remained uncertain, but inside the cabin warmth radiated from fire, food, and the quiet trust between a woman and a boy. For Hannah, the first fragile threads of a new life had begun to weave themselves, tentative but unbreakable, and for Sammy she had become more than a stranger, more than a caretaker. She had become Ma. The midpoint had arrived not with a dramatic confrontation, but with the recognition of what they already had, a bond that no rumor, no doubt no winter storm could easily sever. Together, they had begun to build something permanent, an anchor in a world that had offered them little else. The serenity of Red Willow's outskirts shattered one crisp morning when a rider appeared over the ridge, the horse kicking up a cloud of dust that carried tension like a storm warning. Hannah, tending to the small garden behind the cabin, froze as she saw the figure approach. His coat was polished, his boots gleaming, and a stern expression settled across his face. He was not a townsman. Sammy Greer, the man called out, dismounting with an authority that brooked no refusal. His eyes, cold and calculating, swept over the cabin and its solitary inhabitant. I'm taking him home. Legal custody. By law, he's mine. Hannah's blood ran cold, yet she stood her ground. Her hands clenched at her sides, nails biting into her palms. She had known. This day might come, the day the boys' past would catch up to him, but the confrontation felt like a storm breaking over the fragile life they had built together. You're not taking him anywhere, she said, her voice low but unwavering. This boy is safe here. He's fed, cared for, and protected. I will not let you harm him again, the man sneered. The law is on my side. He belongs to me. Hannah felt the weight of fear claw at her chest, but she refused to give it voice. In that moment, she realized something vital. This fight was no longer just about Sammy. It was about her too. Her courage, her ability to stand for something she believed in, and the life she was finally choosing to claim. The townsfolk, drawn by the commotion, began to gather. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Hannah had spent weeks earning their cautious trust through small acts of kindness, honest labor, and the way she had protected Sammy from the forest's perils. Now, that goodwill would either shield them or betray them. The man stepped closer, imposing, and demanded again. Hand him over, woman. The law is clear. Hannah's eyes swept the crowd. They were watching, waiting for her to falter. Instead, she squared her shoulders and spoke with the authority she hadn't known she possessed until now. I rescued him. I've fed him, sheltered him, healed him, and I will not let him go back to a life of fear. Not today. Not ever. The man's jaw tightened, but the murmurs from the townsfolk grew louder, supportive, protective. She's telling the truth, one man called. We've seen the boy with her every day. He's safe there. Hannah's heart surged with relief, but the threat was far from over. The guardian's eyes narrowed, calculating before finally stepping back, muttering that the law would eventually catch up. But for now, the confrontation had given Hannah clarity. She would fight for Sammy not only with words but with every ounce of determination she could muster. In the following days, Hannah fortified the cabin, prepared for the coming winter, and ensured Sammy had everything he needed to survive the harsh months ahead. She taught him to handle the small tasks that made the difference between comfort and peril, stacking firewood, tending a small stove, even recognizing the subtle signs of approaching danger outside. Through each chore and lesson, their bond strengthened. Sammy's trust deepened into reliance, and he began to imitate her in small ways, fetching wood without being asked, carefully cleaning the cabin, and even attempting to cook simple meals by her side. Each act, though minor, reinforced the unspoken truth. They were a team, a unit forged not by blood, but by choice. Hannah had also begun to allow herself to feel something long dormant, a sense of belonging. Protecting Sammy gave her purpose, a reason to confront her own fears of judgment and exposure. She realized that hiding her identity had kept her safe in the past, but now it threatened to hold her back from the life she was willing to fight for. That night, as snow fell steadily outside, she and Sammy sat together by the fire. He leaned against her, hands sticky with the remnants of bread they had baked together. "Ma," he said softly, testing the word again as if tasting the reality of it. Hannah felt a lump in her throat, warmth flooding her chest. This name, the first she had ever heard from someone who truly depended on her, was more than a word. It was recognition, trust, and a bond that no legal claim could sever. She squeezed his small shoulder gently, whispering, "Yes, I'm here always." The second turning point had arrived, not with a final victory, but with the understanding that the real battle was not the law or the guardian. It was courage, perseverance, and the willingness to stand unflinchingly for the life they were building together. Winter descended with a fury that tested even the most resilient settlers of Red Willow. Snow fell in thick sheets, piling against the cabin walls and frosting the windows with opaque white. Outside, the world became a frozen wilderness, each gust of wind carrying the sharp sting of cold. Inside, Hannah worked tirelessly, keeping the fire alive and the small space warm. Her hands ached from chopping wood and tending the stove, but she welcomed the labor. It was the only way to fight against the relentless bite of winter. Sammy, now more confident yet still cautious, did what he could to help. He carried smaller logs to the fire, stacked kindling carefully, and learned to navigate the slippery paths outside to gather branches for fuel. Each time he stumbled or dropped something, Hannah would guide him patiently, her hands firm yet gentle, ensuring he understood the balance between caution and action. The storm showed no mercy. One night, as the wind howled through the trees and the cabin shook under the weight of snow, a sudden draft revealed a crack in the wooden wall. Cold air seeped in, chilling them both. Hannah wrapped herself and Sammy in extra blankets, but she knew it wasn't enough. The roof groaned under the snow's weight, threatening to collapse, and the firewood dwindled faster than expected. Fear crept in, tightening its grip on her chest. The thought of failing this boy, of letting him suffer in the cold, was unbearable. She could not, would not, let the past haunt her here. Taking a deep breath, she made a plan. Together, she and Sammy would survive, relying entirely on each other. Hours passed in a tense rhythm. Hannah guided Sammy through simple survival tasks, keeping the fire alive, rotating blankets, and even rationing the little food they had left. Each moment was a test of endurance, patience, and resourcefulness. She whispered instructions, encouraging words and quiet reassurances, her voice a steady anchor in the storm's chaos. At one point, a particularly sharp gust rattled the cabin door, sending a shiver through both of them. Sammy clutched her arm. "Ma, I'm scared," he admitted, his voice barely audible over the wind. Hannah knelt beside him, brushing snow from his hair. "I know, Sammy, me too," she admitted honestly. "But we have each other. We'll get through this together." She held him close, feeling the rapid thrum of his heartbeat and the warmth of life that had been so fragile before she found him. Time stretched long and heavy. The storm refused to relent, and yet inside the cabin, a quiet understanding grew. This was more than survival. It was a trial that would define them, shape the bond they had painstakingly built. With each passing hour, the boy learned resilience. Hannah rediscovered her own strength, tempered by fear but unbroken by it. By the third night, exhaustion weighed heavily on them both. The fire had been rekindled and stoked, the cabin secured against the worst of the wind. They sat close, sharing the last of their food, bodies pressed for warmth. In the flickering firelight, Sammy finally allowed himself to rest fully against her. Sighing in relief, "I trust you, Ma," he whispered, his voice small but filled with meaning. Hannah's chest tightened with a mixture of pride, love, and quiet awe. In that statement, simple yet profound, she saw the culmination of weeks of care, patience, and courage. She was not alone anymore. Neither was he. Their bond, tested by both circumstance and storm, had grown stronger than either had anticipated. Outside, the snow continued its relentless descent, a world of white and ice threatening to consume everything. Inside, however, warmth lingered, not just from the fire, but from the quiet, unspoken promise between them. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Through the night, they survived by trusting each other completely. And when dawn finally broke, pale light spilling weakly over the snow-draped landscape, Hannah knew that the crisis had forged an unbreakable connection. It was a bond that could withstand storms, both those of nature and of life, and that realization brought her the quietest sense of hope she had felt in years. The snow had melted enough to reveal muddy trails when the guardian returned, riding into Red Willow with a determination that chilled Hannah's spine. Word of the boy's location had spread, and the townsfolk were gathering in cautious curiosity, their eyes wary, scanning the roads and fields. The man's horse stomped impatiently, sending small clods of mud flying as he dismounted with a harsh command. "There he is," the guardian barked, pointing directly at Sammy, who stood behind Hannah, holding her hand tightly. "Hand him over. By law, he is mine." Hannah's breath hitched, but she stood firm. She had survived the storm, earned the town's tentative trust, and grown into a strength she hadn't known she possessed. "No," she said steadily. "He stays here. You've already failed him once. I will not let you harm him again." The guardian scoffed, glancing at the small group of townsfolk who had gathered. For the first time, he noticed the expressions on their faces. Not curiosity now, but support. Women and men who had once whispered about Hannah now stepped forward. "She tells the truth," one man called. "We've seen her care for the boy every day. He's safe here, and she's the one protecting him." The guardian's jaw tightened as murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Some townsfolk even brought forward small evidence. Scraps of clothing she had mended, a report of meals she had delivered to the cabin, the boy's growing health and strength, all signs that Hannah's guardianship was genuine. Hannah stepped forward, chest lifted, heart pounding. "He calls me Ma," she said softly but firmly. "I am his guardian. I am the one who has loved and protected him when no one else would." The man's eyes darted between Sammy and Hannah, measuring their bond. Sammy, emboldened by Hannah's unwavering presence, stepped forward as well. "I want to stay with her," he said clearly, voice trembling but resolute. "She keeps me safe. She's my family." The guardian's face reddened in anger, but the determination in the boy's eyes and the support of the town left him without room to maneuver. Legal intervention arrived soon after. Documents, witnesses, and the word of the marshal who had once doubted Hannah's intentions. Evidence of her care, dedication, and the boy's trust was presented. Finally, the guardian had no choice. He was forced to acknowledge that Hannah was the true guardian, not through blood or law alone, but through love, care, and the bond they had forged through shared trials. He stepped back, muttering threats of appeal. But it was clear that the fight had been lost. Hannah's hands shook slightly as she knelt and pulled Sammy into her arms. "You're safe," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "You're home." For the first time, Sammy spoke her name fully, aloud and without hesitation. "Ma." The word resonated like a bell in the crisp air, carrying with it a new identity, a life reclaimed, and a purpose Hannah had never imagined she could have. She held him close, feeling the depth of the bond they had built, the culmination of trust, care, and unyielding courage. Around them, the townsfolk dispersed quietly, many exchanging nods of respect and acknowledgement. The threat had passed, and what remained was the quiet victory of love and determination. Hannah stood slowly, carrying Sammy's weight as she surveyed their small home. The cabin, the garden, the woods, they were no longer just shelter and land. They were the foundation of a family she had chosen and fought to protect. As the day drew to a close, sunlight pierced through thinning clouds, illuminating the cabin and the two of them standing together. For Hannah, the name she had buried long ago no longer mattered. She had been given a new one, a new purpose, and a bond that no storm or threat could ever undo. The climax was not a battle of fists or guns, it was a battle of hearts, of courage, and of the undeniable power of chosen family. And in that victory, Hannah and Sammy had both claimed the future they deserved. Spring returned to Red Willow slowly, washing the hills with soft greens and the promise of new life. The snow had melted, leaving behind fertile soil and the scent of damp earth, signaling beginnings rather than endings. Inside the cabin, warmth lingered, not just from the stove, but from the life Hannah and Sammy had built together. The small garden, once sparse and struggling, now thrived under their care. Rows of vegetables pushed up through the dark soil, evidence of patience, diligence, and hope. Sammy crouched near the seedlings, gently brushing dirt from his fingers. "Look, Ma, they're growing," he exclaimed, a bright smile illuminating his face. Hannah smiled in return, her chest swelling with a quiet pride. For the first time in years, she felt truly at home, not just in a place but in a life she had chosen. "Yes," she said softly, "they are growing, just like us." Together, they tended the garden, shared meals cooked over the wood stove, and slowly repaired the cabin walls, patching cracks and reinforcing the roof. Each task, however mundane, became a symbol of their resilience and commitment to each other. The cabin was no longer just a shelter, it was a testament to the bond they had forged through adversities. The days lengthened and the sun grew stronger. Hannah allowed herself small moments of reflection. The past she had carried, the grief, shame, and isolation, remained a part of her, but it no longer defined her. Through caring for Sammy, she had unearthed strength, compassion, and the courage to embrace a life she had once thought impossible. Sammy, too, had transformed. Gone was the timid, wary boy who had crouched under a fallen tree. In his place stood a child who laughed easily, helped eagerly, and expressed love without fear. "Ma," he said one afternoon, climbing onto her lap with a handful of freshly picked herbs, "I'm glad you found me." Hannah hugged him tightly, tears welling in her eyes. "I'm glad I found you too," she whispered. "More than you know." Neighbors from Red Willow occasionally stopped by, bringing small gifts or simply sharing conversation. They had once watched her cautiously, skeptical of her intentions. Now they saw the life she had nurtured and the boy she had protected. Their respect was earned quietly through consistent acts of care and integrity. Hannah welcomed them cautiously, learning once again the value of connection beyond survival. Evenings were spent by the fire, storytelling becoming a ritual. Sammy would ask questions about the forest, about animals, about the days when life had seemed uncertain. Hannah answered with patience and honesty, weaving lessons with warmth and allowing her own laughter to mingle with his. In these moments, the cabin became a haven, not just from the wilderness, but from loneliness itself. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky with streaks of gold and pink, Hannah surveyed the small homestead they had built. The garden thrived, the cabin stood firm, and Sammy laughed as he chased a stray chicken across the yard. She realized then that she had buried the name she once carried, the one tied to grief and regret. In its place, she had been given a new identity, one defined by love, protection, and chosen family. "Ma," Sammy called, running to her side with arms outstretched. Hannah knelt to meet him, feeling the fullness of her life in the boy's embrace. She had found purpose, redemption, and a home, not in the past she fled, but in the future she had chosen to create. The world beyond Red Willow remained uncertain, harsh at times, but within the cabin's walls life thrived. Through resilience, trust, and unwavering care, Hannah had discovered that the family one chooses can heal wounds left by the family one is born into. The past was buried, the present embraced, and the future together was theirs to shape. As night fell, the stars blanketed the sky, and the cabin glowed warmly from within. Hannah and Sammy sat side by side, hands intertwined, hearts aligned. In that quiet, restorative moment, the journey's lessons settled into permanence. Love, courage, and chosen family could triumph over loss, fear, and sorrow. Here, in the heart of Red Willow, they had found what they had both been searching for all along: home. Did Hannah and Sammy find the family they were searching for? Hit like if you believe in chosen family and subscribe for more heartwarming Wild West stories every day.